G'day, welcome to the Australian Property Podcast. This is our weekly 2 cent segment. I'm Pete Wargent from AllenWargent Property Buyers. I'm here with Chris Bates from the Alcove, the mortgage specialist. Chris, how's your week been?
Oh, it's doing well, Pete. I mean, if the people were following along from last week, we ended up going for the massive hike up at Shoal Bay, which is in Nelson Bay there. It was like 25 Ks along the coastline. We ended up doing it in a day and absolute stunning walk. So highly recommend it for anyone who's looking to get out of the city. Got a couple of nights away from the kids, so came back a bit refreshed from that. But just spent the last few days at a sort of Harvard leadership sort of conference that our aggregator put on in the mortgage world, which was very, very enlightening, to be honest. There's a lot of conversations around business model changes around the world and how they affect businesses, and mortgage brokers aren't immune to that. So it's been a good few days. What have you been up to?
You haven't had your international student visa revoked yet for the US, so I suppose it doesn't apply for an online conference, but that was one of the emerging stories over the past week or so. Had a bit of a pause on international student processing in the US. Very hard to predict where that goes. Obviously, there's a bit of an arm wrestle going on between the Trump administration and the university set. A bit of back and forth going on there. It's interesting because if that escalates, it could have a knock-on impact to millions of international students who would either be studying in the US or would want to study in the US, and that could have a knock-on impact to applications elsewhere. I've been over in Europe this week. I'm actually playing in a golf day with some old cricket buddies, some Aussies and mostly Brits, and also catching up with my mum, who I haven't seen for a while. So got a few days down at mum's. So yeah, pretty sedate for me as well. Pretty jealous of your Nelson Bay hike, though. It's a super little spot up there. And obviously a few happy New South Welshmen this week as well with the Origin.
Yeah, and I can't believe it's winter's here, right? So, stock listings in the property market should really dry up. In the last few years, we've actually seen a few upgraders make it happen. It's not easy. You've got to find the right property. You've got to negotiate a long settlement, and you've got to get your place on the market. And in the last couple of weeks, quite a few clients have pulled that off, which is sort of relieving for them because they've got great assets, and some under more competition than others. So it hasn't been a real the heat hasn't really built there, I would say. But it's very stressful trying to make it happen. If you haven't made it happen really by this weekend, Pete, I don't know what you think, but you'd be brave to list your property in a couple of weeks' time with school holidays. So listings are going to really start to dry out. What are you seeing on the ground there?
Pretty much exactly that. There's not a whole lot of stock out there, is there? Just seeing the odd property selling off market at inflated prices. So I think we're just in the very early stages of buyers processing the interest rate cut. Of course, it's really sentiment driven to begin with because a lot of the lenders don't pass on that 25 basis points cut immediately. They quite sneakily hang on to any changes until the start of the new month and just scraping out a few extra $1 million of profit. But you can see there has been a bit of a sentiment change, at least since the last Reserve Bank meeting. Higher auction clearance rates, just a few sort of spicy prices being reported. But yeah, there's a long way to go, I think, in this cycle yet. Reserve Bank would have been very keenly watching the inflation figures this week out for April, which weren't strong, but they were just a little bit stronger than expected. So normally that first month of the quarter, you get an update on some of the goods prices. And actually in April, you usually do get quite a strong print for various reasons. So 2.4% over the years, so nothing too alarming there. But yeah, I guess I'll be keeping a close eye on those core inflation figures because over the rest of this year, some of those electricity subsidies will unwind. It's already happening in Queensland. So we might just see a bit of a jump in the headline rates of inflation over the year. But I think the general view seems to be that in most countries, inflation is kind of back in the bag. So everyone will be quite keen to make sure that continues to be the case.
Yeah, we've seen a little bit of interest. I wouldn't say it's, the herd's really moved yet. I think they might move over the next few months as people sort of go, when we should really think about it. It's a lot of big decisions to sort of think about upgrading. And why I often talk about upgrading is they're the ones that, there's always first-time buyers. There's absolutely been a bit of an investor boom, and I think that'll continue as rate confidence goes down. But The upgraders are the ones that you sort of need to be in the market to sort of create some movement, right? Create new listings that when they buy something, they list, and then it starts to the sort of domino effect. But at the moment, it's still been a bit of a Mexican standoff. Same pricing. I mean, yeah, I think there's a lot of heat on banks to make sure they pass over the rate cuts at the moment. And, the government's very vocal about that. But, if I was in the bank's shoes, unfortunately, they've been very competitive with discounts. So, a few years ago, and they're probably like, ugh, our margins are falling. Maybe this is an opportunity for us to recoup some of that margin by not passing on the RBA rate cuts. But I do feel like that's inevitable. Maybe not in these first two, but as they start to drop more and more, I think you're going to see the banks try to keep some in their back pocket. You're right, Pete. They do like to delay it a few weeks. Not sure why, besides putting some more dollars on their bottom line. But I think it's interesting in these situations. Servicing's getting better, valuations are there, people are still stretched in terms of a cash flow, and clients are coming to us just not so much always for rate. We are getting better pricing than we probably have over the last few years, particularly for investors. So that's a nice change, because it has been quite tough to refinance for customers. If you're basically because you're on a good rate. So, but interest in that sort of picking up. So, yeah, I mean, I'm still looking at the RBA rate cut here, Pete. I mean, this is a story we'll track, but it's probably even gone back down a little bit, right? So we're talking maybe 3 more cuts, before Christmas. So, and highly likely one in July. Is that sort of where you're thinking, Pete?
Well, if you look at market pricing, what's it sort of looking at about a 3% cash rate target at the bottom of the cycle, or the nadir of the cycle. So maybe over the next 12 to 15 months, we might get, that's what markets are looking for essentially, isn't it? 3 more interest rate cuts over the next year. So, but as we often say, that's a movable feast. I think there's some other stuff sort of going on in the background in terms of sentiment, a few changes to superannuation taxation plans. So I think that might just turn a few people away from superannuation potentially at the higher end, and sort of maybe tilt people back into residential property, maybe their own home, or just investing in property outside of superannuation. So that's been going on, even though we haven't had any legislative changes yet. It does seem to be, with Labor's big election victory, that's going to be pushed through as quickly as possible. And I think there's a lot of forecasts out there talking about the impacts of lower interest rates, Labor's 5% first home buyer deposit scheme, which will kick in next year. I saw the Liberal opposition in Victoria talking about scrapping stamp duty for first home buyers next year if they're elected. So there's a lot of demand side measures that are sort of pumping the property market into next year. So at the moment it's early days. I think just a bit of a groundswell of buyer demand, but as you said, it's generally a pretty quiet time of the year anyway, and it's a little bit hard to get a realistic read on things.
Yeah, it's funny, right? So you change the incentive, you change the behavior, right? So they change the incentives in super. People are going to do something, right? Particularly if you're got a lot of money in super. I saw some WiseTech, shareholders have got a lot of money in super. That was a headline. I haven't read the article yet. I haven't had a chance, but you know what I mean? There's a lot of people with a lot of money in super, and they will be really reconsidering whether it's the right structure, because unrealized gains is a real tough one to sort of plan around. And your planners look to advise clients to, giving while living and all those sort of things. I think when I'm at these conferences, I'm always sort of chatting to brokers all around the country and how their business going, where they're seeing demand, etc. And, that sort of made me think about a couple I spoke to in Melbourne, and they're really seeing, particularly on their sort of higher end clients, that they don't really want the beach house. They don't want to be paying the land tax. They'd much prefer to upgrade their home. And I think that's just another example where people go, well, yeah, holding a beach house is really expensive. I don't want to pay all these land tax. I just Airbnb costs, etc. I'm going to have to pay capital gains tax on it. I'm not that confident on the growth in the short term. Maybe I should just bail on that and then put that extra borrowing capacity into a home upgrade. And I think that's a similar thing we're going to see with super, is that, that money will go somewhere, whether it goes into resi property, commercial, gift to the kids. We don't know yet, and it'll be different for every client, but it absolutely is going to have an impact.
Yes, and I think, I've seen there's an article reporting in ABC this week saying first home buyer FOMO is coming. I think that's, I think that's definitely something to watch. I think there'll be I'm pretty sure actually we're doing a listener Q&A. I'm pretty sure one of the questions this week actually relates to a first-time buyer debating whether to buy this year or whether to hold off until next year and get the 5% deposit. So we'll stick around because we'll cover some of your listener questions at the end. So this is our 2 cents segment that we do every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. And so let's go through the big 3 news stories of the week. So first story this week relates to Australia's housing shortage. Now, we're not Robinson Crusoe there. There's a lot of countries around the world like Canada, UK. A lot of countries have been really grappling with housing shortages because they've all been running big immigration programs. That's part of the reason. Of course, the COVID disruption didn't help either. It's always a bit of a nebulous concept trying to work out how many housing units are we short versus the demand. I guess at the simplest level, you could sort of take the population of Australia, 26.5 million, or maybe a bit higher, and then sort of divide it by the average number of people per house. But of course, that's a very sort of broad brush measure. It doesn't account for changes in housing preference. Another thing you could do is look at rental vacancy rates. But again, there's always going to be some dwellings that are vacant, regardless of whether we've got enough housing or not. Shane Oliver of AMP, who I know you've interviewed before on other podcasts, he sort of projects that we've got a housing shortage of over 200,000. And so he just sort of does a cumulative year on year graph where he sort of tracks the number of dwellings built versus the expected demand. He sort of thinks we've got over 200,000 shortage, and the way things are going, heading towards 300,000. So it's almost like an ongoing structural undersupply. And I think just sort of adding some cred to his figures, the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council released their State of the Housing report this week, and that's the government's own advisory body, right? So it's a pretty important set of numbers, and they're projecting that by by the end of the decade, we'll probably be another 260,000 short of Labour's 1.2 million new homes target. So I guess that kind of accords with what the guys at the Housing Industry Association have said as well, and that's that we've not previously been able to build 240,000 dwellings a year. It looks like we're not going to be able to do that over the remainder of the decade if that's what's needed. So it seems pretty likely that over the next 5 years, that 200,000 shortage could blow out towards 300,000 before eventually starting to get better. What do you think?
Well, I think there's a number of problems when we're not building enough, right? It's there's issues with first-home buyers trying to get out of the rental supply, and then that'll free up a rental property. And, obviously, high vacancy rate, that's also forcing people to, increase rents. Investors are still often, got negative cash flows. And if they can increase the rents, they'll absolutely want to, assuming they, often sometimes they don't if they want to keep a good tenant. But I think that's one of the issues here is that we could see some rental price growth, and it already gone up significantly if vacancy rate stays low because we just can't build enough. And even if they do build some, there's such a big lag on it, and it takes many months for it to sort of work through the system. And so, I think it's we don't want to be too pessimistic with it all, but the reality is that, when you've got a ridiculously undersupplied property market and you do things like demand increasing, whether it's government help schemes where they're buying it with you, or 5% deposit schemes, or just really our owner occupier rate has been dropping decades on decades, right? It used to be 70% of homes, now say it's closer to 60 now. And so that's just pent up demand, I believe. I don't think they want to be renting. They would love to be owning a lot of those. And when they can get the cash together, or they've been able to get the deposit, or inheritance comes, they'll absolutely try to enter. And I think that's the big brewing problem. And unfortunately, though, if you think somewhere like Brisbane, they still want to be doing a lot of infrastructure over the next 5 years. It's not like we want to stop building towers and freeways and airports and stadiums and etc. And then even just up, after the floods just up on the North Coast, what is it, 30, 40, 50,000 properties that have been damaged? That takes a lot of work. So who's to say we don't get some major, climate sort of catastrophes that also take a lot of our resources to certain parts of Australia. And so, it's we just haven't got enough people, Pete. Do you agree with that? Or is it more that we're not productivity enough? Or how do you think about it?
Well, I think there's definitely a cyclical element to this and a structural element. So construction has basically been at 10-year lows recently. I think for a number of reasons, but the big one is a massive spike in construction costs at the same time as we got the increase in interest rates. I think we're through the worst of that. I think the inflation figures this week showed that the construction cost inflation for new dwellings, although it has been very high at over 20% at the peak, has now come all the way back to just over 1%. So basically the lowest in 4 years. So I think construction costs leveling out will give developers a bit more confidence. Falling interest rates will as well. And I guess the cyclical element, the figures this week released by the ABS show that actually we're starting to see a pickup now for attached dwellings. So that's right across New South Wales and Victoria and Queensland. So we're starting to build a bit more now. I suppose the elephant in the room, though, is that we've got net overseas migration still running extremely high levels. And over the past few months, it seems to have accelerated again. So I think we always seem to grapple with this idea of having enough people in the right skills. So even though we're running net overseas migration at kind of around the 500,000 level still, if you look at those annualized numbers, we never seem to have the people with the requisite skills. I think we don't always have the right match of people. And actually, as you said, in those construction figures this week, yes, we're starting to see a pickup in residential construction, but there's also competing interests. We've seen an enormous increase in solar and wind and renewables projects over the last 5 years. So we've gone from about 2 billion to 7 billion, and that's a record high share of the construction output. So, and that's only going to increase over the years ahead with the Labor government in place. So, yeah, I guess being a bit more optimistic, I think we'll definitely see an acceleration in housing construction over the next few years. So that's a good thing. But it looks like Labor is going to go with a big population program. And that just means we're always behind the eight ball to a certain degree. And at the same time, we've got to do the Olympics infrastructure. We've got renewables projects that are only accelerating. So there's a lot of competing demand for labour and materials. And I suppose that's why Tim Gurner was saying the other day, we're probably facing 10 years of rental shortages because we're trying to do so much so quickly. And there seems to be no appetite from the government to slow down immigration too much. And therefore, it's just going to be an ongoing challenge over the rest of the next decade.
Yeah, I just wonder, Pete, do we be a bit opportunistic here? And obviously, it's a tricky one, it's always trade-offs. And do we take advantage of Trump's sort of anti-international students? And should the government be doubling down and saying, right, we're a safe home for you. If you want to come here and study, we're the place to come. Do you think that's a good move by the government?
I think we'd probably be optimistic, I think, to get the Harvard applicants. But if there's a general uncertainty or a general vibe shift against going to the US to study, well, yes, for sure. I think Australia's universities, like so many other countries, are largely funded by international students these days. So I'm sure they'd be licking their lips at the prospect of picking up more international students. And again, they tend to, in Australia, we tend to compete with Canada, United Kingdom, to a lesser degree, New Zealand for those sort of mobile international students. So, yeah, I think that's potentially one issue. And I mean, the international students mix has been a big part of the rental shortages in recent years because the students kind of went away during COVID and then en masse they all came back. So I don't think it's just the headline number of students. It's just we saw that population outflow and then suddenly a big surge of rental demand all at once that we couldn't deal with. So, yeah, I mean, almost every article on the subject this week says Australia's housing crisis and rental shortage will inevitably worsen. But I think being optimistic, I think we'll start to see construction picking up from here, really. I think there's a bit more certainty for developers. So hopefully some more projects starting to hit their straps.
Yeah, I think that the shortage is a real funny number, right? I think back in COVID, I forget is it occupants per dwelling or, and think that shifted to we all went to I want to live by ourselves, which was fair enough. And we wanted no flat shares, and then if it went down, we went from 2.6 to 2.3. I'm trying to remember here, Pete. So bear with me and don't quote me on these facts. But I think it's gone back up, right? And if you change that, right, the amount of dwellings divided by the number of peoples per dwelling, then that completely shifts how many dwellings we need, right? Because the same amount of people, but we've got people living in less dwellings. And I think that's something that makes sense, right? But at the same time as people are doing flat shares and moving in with their parents, you've also got people, families breaking up, unfortunately, and, new people moving here and etc. So, so I think that it's not a simple one just to increase, and but it is quite low. I'm not sure if it's by world standards, Pete. So I'm not sure if you ever compared that.
Let's put that one on the to-do list for next week. We'll do a bit of research on the numbers. So
it's a good idea.
Yeah, I'm pretty good usually with stats. I've got a big chart pack that I update every day, but sometimes when I'm put on the spot, I fall short. So we'll have a look into that one. Let's take a look at the second news story of the week. I guess, I was overseas this week, but quite alarming news stories, which we don't need to go into in detail about. The various issues. City crime, I suppose, it's just a global problem at the moment. I do sometimes wonder how much of it is accelerating amounts of crime, and how much we just see it reported much more easily because we've got social media, we've got X reporting stuff in real time with videos, and everyone's holding up their iPhones. But look, it does seem to be a global issue at the moment, and not just for Australia. I mean, in Liverpool, you'd have seen this week with the Victory Parade. There was an issue with some terrible scenes over there. Melbourne had gang violence this week, and there was also shootings in Sydney. And I suppose as a parent, you become much more acutely aware of this stuff. I think when you're sort of younger and on your own, or in the earlier parts of your journey, you kind of think, well, I'll take my chances. But as soon as you become a parent, you become much more attuned to what's going on in the world. And the reality is, if you run big immigration programs, as a lot of countries have, there's going to be cohesion issues sometimes. And the UK has been grappling with this for a number of years now. Australia has, by and large, run very successful immigration programs over the past 25 years. But there are some challenges. I think it would be a real blind spot not to recognise that. I think just from a housing market point of view, Chris, I've looked at some of the academic literature on this, and I'm sure you've covered this in the Elephant podcast before. The literature on crime rates versus property prices and housing markets and that kind of thing, it seems to be a little bit mixed. Though I've seen a number of news articles from ABC, realestate.com.au, Infrastructure Victoria, all talking about whether there are any causal links really between sort of crimes and housing markets. I think my gut feel is there might be maybe not so much in the short term, but maybe over the longer term. The biggest buying cohorts in a market are families. So if you've got serious crime concerns, then that's really going to play into sentiment. I saw realestate.com.au did an article saying how St Kilda's market is thriving despite a number of issues with crime rates locally. ABC did a news article escalating youth crime in Victoria, which has been a challenge. And there's always the ongoing debates about how quickly people are released on bail or otherwise. So, look, it seems to me that the literature is very sort of mixed on these. How do you tend to think about crime rates? Because I suppose there's two different ways you could look at it. You could look to areas where crime rates are very low or serious crime is very low, which is usually the blue chip areas. Or alternatively, you could sort of ignore the headline number and look towards a general, I suppose, gentrification play. So markets that are generally improving over time. But have you ever sort of done any deep dives on this subject in the Elephant podcast?
Not on crime in particular. It's a good subject though, Pete. I think we probably should. But I think the way I think about it is just one facet of livability, right? If that, I think in any area, if there is a part of a suburb that is susceptible to it a lot more, or is exposed to it or sees it, or I do think that, buyers are often going to buy in there, then get affected by it, and then want to sell their property in time because they're fearful of that, particularly like you say when kids are around, etc. And so I think, even potentially a few streets away in the same suburb, it's a little bit off the path. It's not where a lot of people go. It feels safer. Whether it is or not, I don't know. But if it feels safer, that could mean that people want to less sell out of it, which means less supply, which means when more properties come on, people sit there for longer and the turnover rate's lower. And so you probably should see higher growth in areas that people are selling out of more. So I think it's just one facet of the overall livability. And but I think crime's not just happening in certain pockets. There'd be sort of hot spots, absolutely, but I think it happens across the whole city. To be honest, I think places like microburbs, Luke Metcalf, who started that's an interesting one too. If you want to understand more about livability, Domain's done lots of research on this. Neighborlytics is another one. I think if you are interested in property, because you probably are if you're listening to this, trying to understand what makes a great place a great place to live, whether it's access to nature or transport or things like electricity. We're not in the 1900s, but, internet, right? And internet connectivity, that's if you haven't got it and you really care about it, maybe Starlink's changing those. But understanding livability, I think, is a really big topic. And the deeper you go on it, I think the more that you understand around how the property market truly works in terms of buyer demand.
Yeah, so the REA article is quite interesting. So they did a bit of anecdotal stuff here. So they said that rising crime rates have caused St Kilda prices to dip over the past 5 years, with local real estate agents revealing female buyers are avoiding the area. I think it's difficult, though, here to unpick what is just the general market weakness, particularly for apartments in Melbourne over recent years, versus the local stats, which are sometimes, I think, a little bit sketchy for housing prices because you're working off pretty low numbers sometimes. And the numbers are, sometimes a little bit volatile. But anyway, the city of Port Phillip recorded 10,853 criminal incidents in 2024, including 931 assaults, which was the second highest in a decade, and 2,100 or so car break-ins. I think real estate agents in the article said they haven't really seen any change in buyer confidence, but they did say that young single women are largely avoiding the area. But the article also quoted our friend Kate Bakos, who said really the suburb price data reflects more so market fluctuations than anything more significant than that. And as she points out, I think sometimes suburb level data obscures that even within a suburb, you might have a sort of an area that's where the nightlife is, or where there's bars and restaurants that are open really late, and there might be issues there, but then maybe in other parts of the suburb, not so much. And people like to be close to lifestyle factors and nightlife and accessibility. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. I, because I'm somebody who's sort of quite keen on understanding long-term compounding, I generally just like to see things moving in the right direction, even if they're not perfect today. And I think some of this stuff is just intangible. You get, sometimes you go to a suburb or a location and you just get a feel for what it's like. And sometimes that doesn't always come through in statistical data or analysis. So, I think that's where the sort of the softer skills or the more intangible assessments of markets come into play, and a bit of local expertise.
Absolutely, Pete. I think it's definitely one. If crime's increasing in suburbs, you definitely want to be a bit careful, because I do think that, if it's really going to affect buyer demand, particularly from the sort of affluent family market who wants to really stay away, you could find that your suburb does underperform versus just neighbouring suburbs. And so just be a bit careful with that. So we go on to number 3, Pete. I've been thinking a lot about this myself in recent months. What's your take?
Yes, artificial intelligence. Yeah, we actually touched on this last week, didn't we? I think there was an article that talked about AI and the housing market. I mean, it looks to me as though AI is going to impact all industries to a greater or lesser extent over the coming years. And that's the impacts are only going to get greater. I think it's that slowly at first and all at once kind of vibe. I think there's a couple of articles that jumped out this week. Cameron Cusher, who's now running his own business, Cusher Consulting, from this week onwards, said he did a little piece articulating how AI will help with things like property searches or research in the future. I think his old employer, REA Group, were in the news this week being investigated for price gouging. So obviously the portal's margins will be a hot topic anyway over the coming years. But also Robert Gottliebsen in the Australian wrote an article, 5 ways that AI can help lenders and lending. So I think he identified 5 different ways there where AI is having an impact or going to have an impact. I think to begin with, on trying to sort of increase margins for lenders, I think particularly for things like administration, I think AI is going to disrupt a lot of industries in the services sector. Call centers and marketing, well, that's already happening, isn't it? I think I've seen some amazing tools out there where you get a discussion between 2 AI robots and you can't even tell. The improvement in the technology is frighteningly quick. And also he identified other areas where AI will have an impact in the housing market in terms of regulations and retail investors. Chris, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about that article, there's been a tremendous growth in the market share for mortgage brokers over, well, really it's a multi-decade trend to the extent that probably 3/4 of transactions these days go through mortgage brokers. Is there any prospect here for lenders to sort of regain some of that market share by using AI, or do you think brokers are here to stay?
I'm not ignorant to think that mortgage brokers have got a dominant force, and just because we've got it today, we'll always have it. I do think what brokers do provide, and whether it's a digital broker or an actual human or an AI broker, the choice that brokers provide does mean that there's maybe a need for someone in the middle. Now, but whether that's a technology platform like an Uber, right, or an Airbnb that is basically no humans involved, and they basically clip the ticket, and maybe that ticket is a much lower cost than what currently brokers get paid. Maybe customers are happy to go on an online portal, basically fill in and then get made recommendations on what's the right lender and then make applications and don't even want to speak to anyone. I think that world will come at some point. But I think that's often when you've got a home loan, I think people are maybe sometimes forget that maybe the value the broker added at the start, and a few years down the line, they're like, oh, I could save 20 basis points if I switch to another lender. And, whether that's going through a branch or a digital platform or a digital lender, I think brokers need to be really concerned about that. If they're not adding any ongoing value to clients, then clients will go elsewhere. But I also think at the same time, brokers need to be very aware that customer preferences and the way they like to transact with any service provider, I just look at the way I do it as well and go, like, I really enjoy that sort of chat-based experience, that conversational discussions, really powerful and can be tailored, highly personal to you, and you feel a lot of trust with it. The more you use it, particularly now that you can just talk to it, I think that was like the game changer for me. Typing is a bit of a pain. I don't really like it on a phone. I'm pretty bad with text messages. I don't know about you, Pete. I reckon you're the same as me. But I think, but talking to it's very easy and it gets it right. And that opens up a different world. If you can just literally brain dump, you don't even have to say it in any nice way or articulately or really know what you want to ask. You just basically brain dump and it'll start helping you figure it out. I think it's moving less from you prompting it to it sort of prompting you. And I think this sort of AI agent, which is sort of a next version, which is agentic, and I do not see myself as any expert, but I'm definitely going, oh my God, I think I need to learn more about this. And so, I think and banks are absolutely going to use it all through lending. I think absolutely all stages of the real estate market, whether it's the search and the platforms there, the way they go about it will be a little bit less from pick a suburb, pick a price point to tell me about you and I'll help you figure out what's possible. But all the way, the whole real estate agent will be licking their lips on how they can speak to more customers, how they can give better reports to customers, how can they take away a lot of the day-to-day communication with customers. There's a lot of AI getting built for that industry as well. So, yeah, I think it's now the good thing is I do think it'll lead to higher competition, which hopefully will lead to better prices for customers. And I think that's the ultimate win here for mortgage holders across the country. Can we keep eating into the net interest margin of the banks, which, for people with mortgages, they probably want that. People with superannuation funds invested in banks probably don't want that. So, but I think it's heading one way.
I think over the next 6 to 12 months, we should keep an eye out for redundancies across the big lenders. I think AI will partly be used as an excuse for that, because I think there's a bit of cost cutting going on. So the big four lenders will be looking ways to make some savings. But I think over the medium to longer term, things like market research, statistical analysis, that's only going to accelerate via AI. Certainly marketing, call centers, all of that side of the industry is going to pick up. And I think, as you said, it could change the way in which properties are listed in the future as well. So I think just on an ongoing basis, more and more impact. So let's wrap up this week with a couple of listener questions. So the first one from TS, with interest rates coming down and with election incentive promises for first home buyers, wondering what your thoughts are on the likely upcoming movements in residential house prices. We're wondering if increased borrowing capacity might put pressure on demand and push prices up a bit in the near future. We're selling our place of residence in southeast Queensland to move into an over 50s development in the new year, so we're not in a rush to sell. So I think there's a couple of things there. Firstly, in terms of the time of year to sell, traditionally, the most popular time to list is when you're going into the spring selling season, and there'll be more buyers around that time of year. But then you do get more sellers as well. So you could sort of argue both sides of that. I think on the housing market more generally, look, I see all the online news articles about bubble this and bubble that. I think just in the next 2 years, though, look at all the forecasts out there for every capital city and probably for a lot of regional Australia as well. Nominal prices are predicted to increase because we've got all of those factors we've talked about today: lower interest rates, big population growth, massive shortage of housing, borrowing capacity is going up, and then the first home buyer deposit scheme coming in January, ... So I think I wouldn't be in a mad rush to sell because prices are probably moving in your favour. And usually a place of residence is probably a better asset from an equity growing perspective than an over 50s development, which is a bit more niche. So personally, I wouldn't be in a rush, but maybe I'd take a look around the spring selling season. What do you think, Chris?
Look, I think the question's good in terms of sometimes people think, I'll just sell when I'm moving out. And, what's the danger in just putting it on the rental market for a couple of years? If you've got enough money to move into the next home and, while rent rates are coming down, do you want to just try to capture that? Higher borrowing capacities, slower rates, more confidence in borrowing. It's more of a tailwind than a headwind. It's not like it's 2022, 3 and rates are going up and are likely to stay high. And you might want to try to get out before things got worse. And so, just be really mindful on that. And but you might even want to do a 6-month lease. You might say, well, with low vacancy rates, someone might take it rather than having to sign up someone for 12 months. And just consider that option, which you already asked. I think it's a good question just to highlight the point that you don't just have to sell. Sometimes you want to just capture that last little bit of growth. But also just be careful trying to, party on all the way through to the end and be the last one leaving. Sometimes there's a little bit of a pullback in markets at the end when demand sort of, runs its sort of course and maybe more listings come on and, markets can flip quite quick, Pete. I mean, you would have seen it time and time again where, in 3 months, the buying prospects have shifted from a little bit of FOMO to choice. And choice also means unless your property is the best, someone might say, not that keen on that anymore. I've seen markets move, up fast, but also come back fast from a little bit of a frothy top.
I've seen it in one weekend when APRA did their intervention into the housing market some years back. There was a mad frenzy one auction weekend, and then the next week nobody wanted to go near it. So it can turn at the end of the cycle. It can turn pretty quickly, and you don't want to be too late to leave the party. So last question for this week before we finish from Jay. My question: I'm a first home buyer with a deposit saved to buy a unit in Melbourne. Should I just buy now rather than wait? It feels like the market will get mobbed with first home buyers next year. So as I already alluded to, the Liberal opposition in Victoria has pledged to scrap stamp duty for first home buyers buying properties up to $1 million. If they are elected next year, the change would apply to both new and established property. So the average first home buyer would be spending around $40,000. And if they were going up to $1 million budget, well, that could be like over $50,000 difference, depending on whether you're you're due to pay the stamp duty in your circumstance. So it's a tricky one because the allure of a 5% deposit next year is obviously a big factor for people, but also potentially, depending on how the election goes, you might dodge the stamp duty as well. I think, to be honest, if it was me, I would just buy. I'll tell you why. Because every time we've seen these stamp duty schemes coming in, the price, they just get capitalized straight into the market. So the perceived advantage, yes, you might save some cash, but then you probably just end up paying more anyway. So, yeah, look, it's a personal choice, this one. There's no right or wrong, but my gut feel is if I had a decent deposit saved, and there's a potential to buy before the crowd rushes in 2026, I would probably spend some time now, focus on getting a really good asset and a really good deal, and then, let everyone fight it out for themselves next year. What do you think?
It's funny, Pete. I've been thinking this is obviously one of the next plays we're likely to see is the governments all lift their stamp duty concessions in line with the 5% deposit scheme. Because if you tie those two things together, that absolutely brings a lot of demand into the market. And one without the other, it's good, but people still need to pay the stamp duty. And in Victoria, they do like to charge a lot for stamp duty. It's always known for the one that charges the most. And so if you can not pay that, is a big saving for first home buyers. There is an existing exemption. I think it's only up to $750 or $600. I have to always go and double check these things, rather than trying to remember them all the time. I think that I think while it's Victoria, I used to say that won't come up. In Brisbane, Pete, what is it up there at the moment? And in New South Wales, they're sort of under $1 million, but who's to say that doesn't go to 1.5 million like Dominic Perrottet did the change to land tax a few years ago. What do you think, Pete?
Yeah, I think so. No, I think actually what it will do as well is it will boost construction. I think because a lot of people will look to new builds. I think a lot of first-time buyers do like the idea of buying new, particularly if it means they don't have to attend an auction. So I think it will catalyse a lot of demand into the housing market, but some will go into new builds, not just established. But I'm just hearing anecdotally as well, a lot of investors are saying, well, hang on, the rental yields for units are really good for Melbourne versus houses, the differential. Maybe I should jump in before the first home buyers come in. So, yeah, a lot of these measures that get introduced, they get arbitraged away pretty quickly as well. So, yeah, sometimes it's better to blank out the noise and focus on getting the process right, and then the result will take care of itself. So, yeah, it's a personal decision, that one, but I think there'll definitely be a rush next year as some of these measures come into being. So what's on for you this weekend, Chris?
It's a good question. I usually don't find out till 8 p.m. on a Friday night, but I actually do know what I'm doing this weekend, so you've had to remind me. Good friend of mine, my wife, to be honest, in particular, her dad has a farm down in Canberra, and it's an olive farm, and every year they go there and take the olives off and have a bit of fun, have a bit of a shindig, bit of line dancing, bit of a kangaroo curry, I believe, and you go for a swim in the dam. I went last year, but it was raining. It wasn't the funnest. I do enjoy my gardening, so I was just pruning in the rain, listening to podcasts. Not ours, to be honest, Pete. I'm not that vain, but we're going there again this weekend. Better weather, still freezing though. So the kids want to camp. We want to just go to a Bates motel on the side of the freeway somewhere. So we'll see who wins, the kids or the parents. But that's our weekend. What are you up to?
Beautiful. Yeah, a bit of golf for me, then seeing Mum. So no doubt I'll be hearing all about Liverpool's amazing title victory. Mum's a Scouser. In fact, her entire extended family are all Scousers. So I won't hear the end of that, but always good to catch up with family. So yeah, pretty quiet for me. And that's it for this week. So send in your questions. We always like to cover those in 2 cents. And have a cracking weekend, everyone, and look forward to seeing you next time around.
Thanks, Pete. Let's talk soon.
Thanks for watching this video on the Rask Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.